Hello, hello, hello. Today we're going to look at maximum and minimum prices. This is going to be based on the demand and supply graph. So if you need some help with the demand and supply graph, it's a good idea to look at my demand and supply video. All right, let's get started. So as I said, everything's based on demand and supply, okay? So the idea that producers are willing to supply goods at these prices, the higher the price of a good is, the more they're willing to supply. And for the consumer, they're willing to buy at different prices, but as prices rise, they're less willing to buy these goods and services. Now, this market adjusts all the time. Demand goes up, demand goes back, supply goes up, supply goes back. And it's a consistent adjustment all the time. And where buyers and suppliers are happy to meet, that's what we call equilibrium. And they meet in the middle here. Now, what happens with a maximum minimum price is we put a line in, let's say max price or min price here, or a line in max price or min price here. That's either going to be above or below equilibrium, and it's going to put us in a state of disequilibrium. So that's what we're going to look at today. All right, let's move forward. Let's take an example of what the government can do. They might decide that rice is really important for the country, and they are going to put a max price on it. And the max price will be set below equilibrium, meaning people can buy this rice for a cheaper price. But it's not as simple as that, is it? Let's have a look at the graph. So as we can see on this graph here, max price, straight line. The max price is $1, okay? Set below equilibrium. So what we need to do is we need to analyze firstly the demand line, how it's moved along the demand line to here. And we also need to analyze the supply line and how it's moved along the supply line to here. And we need to identify what this disequilibrium state does. How about you pause the video and have a think? So what happens here is quite interesting. Looking at the supply line, we can see suppliers are less willing to supply at this price. Price is cheaper. They can produce something else and sell it for a higher price. So only these producers are going to be willing to produce. These producers now are out the game. They're not willing to supply it. Next, consumers though. Originally, we had consumers buying 14 million packets of rice. Now we've got consumers willing to buy 18 million packets of rice, a 4 million packet increase, because the price has gone down by 50%. But this is where the problem is, isn't it? We've got 18 million packets wanting to be sold. However, producers are now only producing 10 million. That's a big gap. And what does that big gap give us? A shortage. So we have a shortage of people wanting to buy and suppliers supplying these goods. Now, this 8 million shortage can actually cause more problems in society. These people that get access to it early at these prices, they might be able to sell them on the black market for higher prices, as there is now a shortage. And as people are having less rice in society because the suppliers have left and they're not producing anymore, this might lead to starvation and other issues. So while the government might feel they're doing good and doing the right thing, if they don't understand the basics of economics and these graphs, they could be damaging their entire society. Something to think about. Next, what happens if the maximum price is set above equilibrium? The answer to this one is pretty chill. Nothing. The company is already operating below the max price. So nothing happens. This is a nice trick question they love to give you in exams. All right, let's move on. So the government have a change of tact. They want to help out chicken farmers. Chicken farmers are struggling. Prices are too low. Farms are closing down. So the government say, you know what? Let's force a minimum price on the chicken. A minimum price above equilibrium. So now we've got an opposite situation here. Can you pause the video and work out what's going on? We know there's a disequilibrium. And we also know with the higher prices, suppliers that were originally going to supply 14 million chickens are now willing to supply 19 million chickens. So the amount of chickens supplied in society is going to increase substantially as these suppliers are going to be looking for higher profits. However, what about the people? Sadly, the people that were willing to buy 14 million are now only willing to buy 9 million because the price is too high for them. So we're only selling 9 million, but we're producing 19 million, a 10 million gap. This is known as a surplus and also can be very risky for society. Final question. What about a minimum price below equilibrium? If you got the one before, you'll get this again. Nothing. The equilibrium price is already above the minimum price. All right, moving forward. Exam question time. Dun, dun, dun. What's the difference between a shift and a movement on the demand curve? Do you remember? This is what the mark scheme says. A shift is the entire line. A movement is a movement along the curve, okay? An easier way to write this out looks like this. Better to write it in sentences, isn't it? All right, moving forward. A 4-mark question. What are some of the variables that could cause an increase in the demand for a good or service? And remember, an increase in demand is a shift to the right of the demand curve. An increase at every price level. There are so many variables. Reduction in the price of complements. So I sell earphones and iPhones. If iPhones go down in price, people will buy more earphones. They complement each other. Substitute prices goes up. Substitute is competition. Samsung and iPhones. If the price of an iPhone goes up, people will buy more Samsung phones, which is actually what we're seeing right now in the market. Change in incomes. If you sell a decent product and incomes increase, people will buy more. If you sell low quality products and incomes go down, people will also buy more. Change in taste. Think about fads and how things change overnight. And of course, advertising. And you can see that the question was asking for you to describe. So there wasn't even any explanation required. You just pick 4 of these and get 4 marks. Pretty relaxed, right? Next exam question. This one's all about explaining. You see how you have to explain the process. Now, I've put the increase in demand of a good or service on this graph to make life easy for you. So this is what the graph should look like. Can you explain what's going on in the graph and try and get those remaining marks? And remember, you will get marks in the mark scheme for making a correct graph. Usually you get marks for marking E1 and E2. You get marks for the demand movement, and you also get marks for labeling the X and Y axis correctly. Yep, you can see here how the marks are allocated, which is pretty chill. So if you get good at drawing graphs, you can do pretty well in these exams. But the explanation is where we make the rest of the money up. So when we explain it, all we're doing basically is explaining how the curve moves to the right. We could say anything that was said before about substitutes or incomes changing. And then what we need to do is explain the x-axis and explain the y-axis. And that's what gives us our final marks. So yes, when we have an explain and it's related to a graph, this is how we do it. Usually you get 2 or 3 marks for the graph and the movement, and you get 2 or 3 marks for explaining that and looking at the X and Y axis. Okay, now let's get into some real life situations regarding minimum and maximum price. I've lived in Shanghai before, and I think it was an awesome city to be in. And look how beautiful it is in this picture. So let's get started on this Vice video.
The market is boiling hot. Over the last 10 years, Shanghai has raised and rebuilt the city, leaving the skyline almost unrecognizable. Demand for new apartments continues to surge, with prices hitting an all-time high in September. The Chinese government, fearing a widening inequality gap between the cities and the countryside, is urgently looking to control the bubble, implementing strict buying restrictions over the course of 2016, with the most recent round last week. Isabel Jung headed to Shanghai for a view of the city's soaring property market.
It's not a bad view to wake up to, is it?
Yeah,
So how much does a view like this set you back?
this one costs about $7 million US.
About 7 million.
Yeah.
Bargain. How has the housing market in China changed over the last few years?
I think if you look back 10 years ago, the income was relatively low, so housing price was also very cheap. But as China's middle class become bigger and bigger, the housing price start to go up.
You can see some of these areas down here look like they've been flattened out.
Yes, so they demolished those older houses.
So this whole area is still being knocked down and built up.
It's still ongoing, so this is part of the city's regeneration process.
With China's stock market underperforming and other forms of investment mistrusted among the Chinese middle class, those who can afford it are snapping up their second or even third property as a symbol of status. Throughout the year, the government's phased in market cooling restrictions to counteract multiple housing purchases in an attempt to bring demand back under control.
但是还是蛮美的，
对，是蛮美的，
改变了很多。
到处都有建筑的这些。
建筑的声音，对，
Ms. Chen and her husband have purchased 2 Shanghai apartments in the last few years. They're now on their hunt for their third. 这个房子你喜欢吗？
看了好多套，这个房子蛮好。
这个房子你看过好多套，一套这个房子是大概多少钱
？1000多一点点，1000万多，1000万。
But Ms. Chen is not the type to let the government's cooling measures disrupt her buying spree. Instead, like others in the city, to buy apartment number 2, she found a loophole in the government's restrictions.
不断政府出来新的政策，所以也就放慢了脚步。你如果是婚姻状态，有一套房子，你买第2套的话，那就是付的比例要很高。我们最后也是听朋友介绍，我们夫妻俩就去形式上做了一个离婚。
And what did your husband say when you told him you wanted a divorce?
应该是一脸的惊愕嘛。爱情不能这样，我们试试看，我们离婚，试一下我们的感情嘛。
It's the most romantic divorce I've ever heard about. Ms. Chen and her husband were not alone. Fake divorce became something of a trend, forcing the government to since close this loophole. Shanghai's new middle class have fast become an urban elite. Those born into Mao's China in the 50s and 60s now enjoy an economic emancipation, as the country has opened itself up to foreign investment in the 90s, creating a new consumer class.
然后小时候的时候，我们那时候生活在计划经济嘛，那现在改革开放了，确实物质丰富了好多好多，特别是经济上吧，每个人手里都有点小钱。我觉得小时候没有那么多新衣服，现在每天穿新衣服，每天穿时装，精神上更丰富一点，物质上也更多一点，然后房子租了更大一点。
But income disparity in China is increasing. Over the next decade, a projected 400 million people will move to China's cities. Shanghai is already the most populous city in the world, which inevitably means that some of its oldest residents are having to make way for the new. We're actually super close to the center of Shanghai, and this little pocket that's surrounded by huge skyscrapers has all these little lane houses, half of which have already been torn down, and the other half of which are due to be torn down, although it does look like there are still some residents here. 你好，你多长时间住在这里呢？
我60多年了。
60多年。哇，这政府给你压力要？
他没给我讲呀，他没给我利益啊，他给我了我就走了。
你为什么要走了？
他给我房子我再走，他不给我房子我不走，就这么个道理。
可以看一下吗？
看得好。
很快吗？可以看一下。
不是很太脏了，不好看，你看我这个家里怎么像什么样子啊？
你很喜欢动物？
我们家海老虎都有了，在天上飞的，水上有的，地上跑的，
走的，
海老虎都有了。
都有啊。这个就是这样吗？还是？
太脏了。
哦，然后这是你的。
这我们老两口。
哦。一个房间。
这是我们的房间，我跟我老婆的。
哦。
这里厨房间。当心，这里走。
Old Shanghai residents like Li Dejun will eventually be relocated to the ever-expanding sprawl of the suburbs. Those who are successful with government negotiations will receive compensation for new homes, far from the city centre they've become accustomed to. 拆房子吗？
我是拆房子的，不搭嘎了。
为什么要拆？
这房子太老了，要建那个高楼大厦。
哦，就是超高的。
高的呀，你看这个破破烂烂的房子都是不行的。
中国发展的这么快，
还可以吧？还可以吧？中国你看现在遍地都是高房、高楼大厦。过了5年以后，你再来看，漂漂亮亮的，跟你小姐一样，这么漂亮，这个地方都给我搞好了，懂吗？我都给我收开了，懂吗？
Okay, that was a quite interesting video for me because I used to live in those areas in Shanghai. So, looking at this video, what areas did we identify as problems within the Shanghai property market? We established that house prices were getting ridiculously high. When this was filmed, I believe salaries were around 10,000 RMB a month, meaning if they saved for even 100 years, they still might not be able to buy the properties that were in these videos. And this is mainly because now what happens in China with the one-child policy is you have parents helping kids buy properties, but you also have the grandparents chipping in to help as well. And that leads to all the prices going up. So we've got super high house prices. Regular people with an average salary of 9 to 10K can't afford them. The government are restricting property purchases. They're trying to stop people from buying lots of properties, leaving them empty, manipulating the market, waiting for the prices to appreciate. And there's a huge disparity, like an income gap. You can see the income to house price ratio. These are challenging times when growth is so rampant. Now, let's draw a demand and supply graph for these 5 scenarios, okay? Well, we'll start with number 1. China has a growing middle class and demand is crazy for buying houses in Shanghai. So pause the video and try and draw the graph. Did you get a graph like this? I hope so. You can see that demand has increased substantially, meaning that more houses are going to be produced and supplied. We haven't done elasticity yet, but it's more than likely that this supply line will be more vertical because it's very hard to increase the supply of houses overnight. However, we can see that there's a substantial increase in prices. Number 2, the government introduced a new law to stop people from buying more property if married. Did you show the demand line going back? I hope so. But the reality is probably the demand line only goes back a little bit because not everybody is going to get divorced to circumvent this. In theory, the price should go down again, okay, leading to the average person maybe having a chance of buying some of these properties. And here's the loophole that the lady exploited in the video. Some people managed to avoid the new law condition by divorcing. And it looks like this. So our demand shifted back initially, and now it's shifted forward because these are the people here from E2 to E3 that managed to use that divorce loophole. Interesting, right? So prices are still going up. Number 4, the government closed this loophole. Bang. Gone. Unless they find another way. And finally, number 5, the government restrict the building of high-rise buildings and knock down current ones. Which line do you think that's going to affect? The answer is the supply line. Supply of buildings is going to shift back if they're being knocked down and building restrictions take place. So that's going to lead to E1 moving to E2. We can see our equilibrium quantities move back. Okay, so we've got less houses available for everybody. But on top of that, the prices have also increased at the new equilibrium point. So less houses available at higher prices. Final question then for you about what a government can do to fix these obvious problems of super high prices with houses. Now, there's lots of things they can do. Can you just pause the video and think of some? Let's have a look then. So they can have a max price effort, a maximum price on the sale of houses. However, this would result in a shortage as we saw on the last graphs. However, this would result in a shortage as we saw on the earlier graphs. As you can see, this max price below equilibrium leads to a shortage because so many people will be wanting to buy those houses and the suppliers will be less willing to sell or produce those houses. So this could cause even more problems of homelessness and black markets. They could invest in ways to increase supply. I think this is the healthier option. More high-rise buildings. They have tried some policies of putting skyscrapers in areas that don't have a high population and encouraging people to move there. But sadly, a lot of these houses remain vacant as no one wants to live there. There's no background, culture, or history in those areas because they're all newly built up. They could start public housing schemes, again, increasing supply or subsidizing the people that need it. Could even subsidize the private companies to build more houses and sell them for lower prices. Ideally, setting a max price below equilibrium and subsidizing at the same time can be very beneficial. They can make it easier for companies to build in certain areas, increasing supply, encourage foreign investment, increasing supply, or find ways to reduce demand like they did with the law on increasing tax on second property purchases. They can also prevent foreigners from buying properties, and they could offer better financial products, a substitution. So instead of buying a second house and getting an 8% return a year when you rent it out, they could offer high interest accounts where people might get 9% return on their money if they invest it. So then, question, is public housing a good thing? Yes or no? What do you think? Some people think it's great. It gives poor people a place to live. Housing standards could be raised, raises quality of life for everybody, reduces poverty, and it helps those at the bottom of society. However, there are some disadvantages from the debates I've had in class. Tax money must be used for this. This could be used for hospitals instead. Why shouldn't these people work for a living and be able to get into the mix like everybody else does? Yes, it's difficult, but everybody else is facing difficulties as well, is one of the arguments. there's an argument that it might lead to more government debt, which is a problem. So these are always interesting debates in class. I wonder where you stand. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, that's it from me today. I hope you all have a good day, and I'll see you again.